Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to session 1 of part 5. This part of the guidance talks about child-on-child sexual violence and sexual harassment. Paragraph 428 to 433 are additional paragraphs that are set out that this kind of abuse can happen inside schools, outside school, as well as online. The paragraph reinforces the need for reports to be taken seriously and that victims should be provided with support throughout. Further information and guidance will be found in the document Sexual Violence and Sexual Harassment Guide, which has already been published but will take effect from September 21. All cases of sexual violence and harassment need to be dealt with, including those that have happened outside school or inside school or online. So regardless of where the case of sexual harassment or violence has taken place, it needs to be dealt with when reported, or when it comes to your knowledge that something of this nature has happened. It needs to be dealt with sufficiently. Sexual violence and harassment can occur between two children of any age and sex, from primary through to secondary. The common age is from 10 years old onwards. It can occur through a group of children sexually assaulting or harassing a single child or a group of children. So it can happen one-to-one between two children. It can happen between a group of children to a single child, or a group of children to a group of children as well. Sexual violence and harassment exists on a continuum and may overlap. They can occur online and face-to-face, both physically and verbally, and is never acceptable. So regardless of in what form sexual violence or harassment takes place, the clear message needs to go out that it's never acceptable, whether it's physical or verbal. All staff working with children are advised to maintain the attitude of "it can happen here." This has been mentioned in previous sessions. It's mentioned throughout the guidance. So schools really need to take this seriously and adopt this attitude that it could happen here. Addressing inappropriate behavior, even if, it's very important, as it would prevent. When you address inappropriate behavior, there's likelihood that it will prevent further inappropriate behavior or abusive or violent behavior taking place in the future. Children who are victims of sexual violence and harassment will likely find the experience stressful and distressing, and therefore there's a lot of emphasis on schools to provide support throughout. This will have an impact on their educational attainment, specifically if the perpetrator attends the same school as well.
So actually that's important that schools take that into account and have processes that clearly support the child to continue to do well in the classroom, even though that they may be going through this difficult time. And so that requires you to be speaking with your teachers, those that are in contact with them, providing the support that they need to continue to make progress. And that's really made very clear in these paragraphs, that those that are experiencing or have experienced sexual violence or sexual harassment will obviously find the experience distressing, but it's the impact of that experience and what schools are expected to do to support that child is made clear, and you must, as a school, have process in place to support that child so that their educational attainment is not affected, or you can minimize as great as possible the impact that it will have on their work in progress.
Another paragraph has been added that schools should be aware of the safeguarding incidents or behaviours that they can be associated with factors outside the school, including intimate personal relationship, child sexual exploitation and criminal exploitation. So we need to keep these factors in mind. Whilst any report of sexual violence or sexual harassment should be taken seriously, staff should be aware it is more likely that girls will be the victims of sexual violence and sexual harassment, and boys being perpetrators, but we've got to also bear in mind that it can be the other way around. Boys can also be victims too, but most commonly it has come about that girls are victims and boys being perpetrators. It is essential that all victims are reassured that they are taken seriously and that they will be supported and kept safe. I think that's a key factor, that all victims should be reassured. They should be made to believe that you are taking them seriously and that you will support them throughout and keep them safe.
Well, that's been recurring, hasn't it?
Yeah.
All the sessions that we've done so far. This is a common theme throughout this revised guidance document, that whatever abuse they are reporting, absolute priority for schools must be that they show clearly from the very beginning of this process to those victims, to your pupils, that you are going to give them as much support as you can, that you're going to listen to what they've got to say to you, and that you're going to do what you can do to support them. So that's been reiterated throughout this document, and it's come again. So really important that you are reviewing your processes about how you are doing this as a school.
It's the same for not giving them the impression that they're becoming a problem, they're creating a problem by reporting that kind of abuse or harassment, nor should they be made to feel ashamed of making a report. So reassurance is key at all times. Staff should read Part 5 alongside the departmental advice against about sexual violence and sexual harassment between children in schools. Like I've mentioned before, that guidance will be effective from September the 1st. What sexual violence and harassment constitutes. So that guidance along with Part 5 of this guide, keeping children safe in education, will give you clear indication of what sexual violence and harassment looks like. The important context to be aware of, including what is consent, power imbalance, and developmental stages. Harmful sexual behaviors, including that a child displaying harmful sexual behavior may be an indication that they are a victim of abuse themselves. And related legal responsibilities for schools. Also, advice on a whole school approach to preventing child-on-child sexual violence and harassment. So all this has been reiterated in previous sessions, but it is strongly advised that along with Part 5 of keeping children safe in education, staff also read the sexual violence and harassment between children in school guidance, which will be effective from September. It also entails detailed advice on responding to reports of sexual violence and harassment, including safeguarding and supporting the victim, also the alleged perpetrator. So it's not just about providing support for the victim, but it's also about providing the correct support for the perpetrator. Paragraph 434, a new paragraph has been added making reference to Part 2 of keeping children safe in education, about having clear systems in place. And we've discussed this in session 2, but having repeated it again in Part 5, it just emphasizes how important it is that schools should have clear procedures in place.
And that is actually to make clear to all members of the community that we take this very seriously. That's already been made quite clear from the first few slides that we've shared so far, that we know it could happen here, that we will take it seriously, we will support those that come to us, and the words "they should be well promoted" in this paragraph needs to be evaluated. So is this something that's happening in our school? If we were to make a judgment about our systems, would we be able to come to that judgment that we are promoting well across the school? Do children understand those processes? Are children able to confidently, the word confidently has been put there for a reason, that children shouldn't just be able to say, well, yes, we know that, Mrs. Smith is here and we can go to her. They should be able to say, our school has really good processes. So if we're feeling unwell or we're feeling down or something's not right, there are people that we can speak to, and they will always make sure that they're available for us. That is exactly what we mean about confidently reporting. So evaluate your own processes and strengthen them where they need to be. And that those last words of this paragraph, knowing that their concerns will be treated seriously, is again emphasizing how important it is that children feel that people are going to listen, that you're going to follow it through, that you're not going to see it as a burden upon, or they're not going to feel burdened by sharing that with you. So again, a review of your current processes is strongly advised.
Paragraph 435, I think this paragraph in Keeping Children Safe in Education just reinforces the need for schools to acknowledge that sexual violence and harassment does take place, and when it is reported, to acknowledge that as well, to understand the scale of the harassment and abuse, and to understand that when schools don't take it seriously and they refuse to recognize that it's happening, that develops it leads to a very dangerous culture in school of acceptance, and the fact that that kind of behavior is acceptable, which is clearly not. Therefore, I think this paragraph is brought in just to reinforce those key aspects. This is a new paragraph which identifies that children and young people may not always make a direct report. So they may not always come forward and report the fact that they've been a victim of sexual abuse or sexual violence or harassment from another peer or another young person. You might hear this in conversation, or you might have another young pupil come and speak to you about it. So I think the key message here is always be very, very vigilant. Do not disregard conversations that you may hear. Do not disregard them. Be vigilant and be curious on what exactly is happening or what is being discussed in those conversations, and where reports need to be made, you need to take action immediately.
I think it's quite important as well that as part of that staff training programme that you're all putting together now, recognising those changes and ensuring that you are clear as a school about what your processes are going to be from September, when this guidance becomes effective, is that all members of your school community understand what to do when they overhear conversations that could cause some concern. And in most of our schools, we will have lunchtime staff who are on duty at lunchtime when these conversations are likely to take place. And so it's important that they understand what they need to do should they overhear information from pupils that could be concerning. Who are they going to speak to? How are they going to deal with it? Are they going to have conversations with other members of staff on duty? What do you expect of them? And how quickly should that come? So part of your training and development for staff should include all members of staff who need to know what it is that they need to do when they are seeing these conversations or hearing these conversations take place. And this final part of the paragraph, observing behaviour, often things go missed, and amiss, and not enough time is taken to unpick what might be happening, or information is shared with key members of staff. And it's really important that, again, all members of the school staff team are aware of what to look out for in terms of those changes to behaviour. And those changes can come in so many different forms. And again, it's really important that we are swift to act when we see those changes taking place.
Paragraph 441 identifies that if the setting responds poorly to a report, this can undermine the confidence of others to report what is happening to them. So again, it's about how schools respond to reports of sexual violence and harassment. And if other pupils see that a report has been responded to very poorly or it's not being taken seriously, that will have an impact on others coming forward to make reports of that nature. So responding to a report of sexual violence and sexual harassment, I think part of this was covered in session 1, part 1 of keeping children safe in education. But make sure you understand and follow your child protection policy and procedures for dealing with peer-on-peer sexual abuse. If you have any concerns about the child's welfare, act on them immediately. Don't wait for a disclosure. So don't wait for the child to come forward, or don't wait for somebody else to share that concern with you. If you've got a concern, you need to act immediately upon that concern. Ask the child if they've been harmed and what the nature of the harm is. Listen, reassure them that you will keep them safe and you will provide, sufficient support for them. Reflect back using their language. I think we've got to bear in mind that sometimes it can be quite traumatic, the experience. So to keep on asking the child to remember what has happened is going to be a bit difficult. So I think you need to just use their own language and get them to reflect like that. Yeah.
Quite some detail in part 1. So again, the same applies where you have a report of sexual violence and sexual harassment. The same principles apply. The way that you would speak to children, receiving the information from them, and what next steps you will take, again, would be followed through here. Just something to bear in mind here.
And again, being mindful that some children may face additional barriers. So, to be mindful of that, and to be mindful that it might be the first time they're reporting. And like I've just mentioned about the fact that trauma can have an impact on memory. So be mindful of how you speak to them and get them to recall the information. Staff should tell their DSL urgently where appropriate, they should take action themselves. So if they feel that by speaking to the DSL, I'll be wasting time and the child needs help immediately, then you take action yourself. If the child is in immediate danger or at risk of harm, a referral to children's social care must be made. This has been covered in part 1, where we discuss sexual violence and harassment, that if a child is under 10, you still need to refer to the police because a crime has been committed and police will take sufficient steps. Find out where the victim and the alleged perpetrator share classes. So if in the event of them being in the same class or them sharing transport, you need to ensure that you take reasonable steps to ensure that there is a reasonable distance between the two, traveling to school or traveling back home. Okay, risk assessments. So where there has been a report of sexual violence, the DSL or the deputy should make an immediate risk and needs assessment. Where there has been a report of sexual harassment, the need of a risk assessment should be considered on a case-by-case basis, because some cases of sexual harassment might not require a risk assessment, whereas some may. But where there's a case of where there's a report of sexual violence, a risk assessment is a must. So the risk assessment, the risk and needs assessment should consider the victim, especially their protection and the support. So support and protection for the victim. Whether there may have been other victims, the alleged perpetrator, so you need to consider that in your risk assessment also, or other children at the school, especially any actions that are appropriate to protect them from alleged perpetrator or from future harms. So you need to consider the victim, the alleged perpetrator, also other children in the school. The risk assessment should be recorded and should be kept under review. At all times, the school should be actively considering the risks posed to all pupils and put adequate measures in place to protect them and keep them safe. The DSL or deputy should ensure they are engaging with children's services as required. Where there has been a report of sexual violence, it is likely that professional risk assessments by the social worker or sexual violence specialist will be required. The risk assessment written by school is not intended to replace detailed assessments of expert professionals. So what it's saying is that where there's been a report of sexual violence, the school has to do a risk assessment instantly, immediately. However, once it's been reported and so social services are involved, the social worker or professional services will do a professional risk assessment. The school's risk assessment should then shouldn't replace the professional risk assessment. The professional risk assessment is the one you should go by, but you should liaise regularly with the social worker and professionals to ensure it is relevant. The DSL or deputy is likely to have a complete safeguarding picture and be the most appropriate person to advise the school's initial response. So important considerations will include the wishes of the victim in terms of how they want to proceed. So like we discussed in part one, when it comes to, we discussed in part one under peer and peer abuse, that when it comes to a case of sexual violence or harassment, the victim's wishes should be considered. The nature of the alleged incident, including whether a crime has been committed or whether harmful sexual behavior has been displayed. The ages of the children should be considered, the developmental stage of each child involved, any power imbalance between the children. For example, if the perpetrator is significantly older or more mature or more confident. So these things have to be considered. Also, whether the victim has a disability or a learning difficulty or is vulnerable in any form. If the alleged incident is a one-off or a sustained pattern of abuse, so that needs to be considered also. Also, that sexual violence and harassment can take place within intimate personal relationship. So is the victim and the perpetrator in any form of a relationship? That also needs to be considered. Are there any ongoing risks to the victim or other children or other children in the school or staff? Other related issues and wider context, including any links to child sexual exploitation and child criminal exploitation. So you need to consider whether the perpetrator, the background of the perpetrator, and whether there is a possibility that they could be involved in child sexual exploitation or criminal exploitation. Okay, so additional paragraph 449 just reinforces that the expectation is of zero tolerance approach in all schools to all reports of sexual violence and harassment. And that brings us to the end of session 1. Inshallah, we will be back for session 2.